Hello, everyone. Welcome to the April 2022 Ops Engineering Showcase edition, the APAC edition. And today we have what I consider a great demo that Maria is going to be doing about testing the CI schema. And so, Maria, if you are ready, then the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, let me just share my screen. Can you see my screen? Okay.
Yep,
so
looks great.
I'll be talking about how we added tests to the CI schema. But before that, I'll just give a quick rundown of what the CI schema actually does for us, so we have an idea of what we're testing. So we're seeing the pipeline editor. And this is where the users write their CI config, right? So what the CI schema does is, under the hood, the editor is running the Monaco editor, and we register the CI schema there so that it can validate the data that we're inputting here. And it basically gives us like a couple of functions. One of them is we could have annotations. So if we hover over these keywords, like the except keyword, the stage keyword, we can see like the definition of what they actually do. And the other one is if we have errors in our syntax, for example. So for example, if we change the stage into an array, we're going to see the squiggly line. And if we hover over it, we're going to see what the error is. So it's an incorrect type because we are expecting a string for the stage. So it's not going to be a valid input here. So if we change this back to build, then it's going to be correct. So that's basically what the CI schema does. The validation all happens on the front-end side. And it's basically just additional feedback to the user while they're writing their code in the pipeline editor, right? So how do we test the JSON schema? First, what does it look like? The CI schema is basically just like one big giant JSON object over here. And it basically describes like each keyword that we can use in the CI config. So for example, in the stage keyword over here, this is the description that we were looking at earlier, and this is the type. So it says that the stage is expecting a string with a minimum length of 1. So it does this for all of the keywords that we are using, that are valid and that we are using in the CI config. It's a pretty big file. Like it's about currently 1,400 lines of code. So the question is, how do we able to test this? In the past, every time we have to update the keywords and the definitions, we basically just had to test this manually. So we would just update the schema and then see, like, play around here in the pipeline editor and see, okay, does this work with this specific input or not? And it gets kind of tedious, and it doesn't really give us that much confidence in our code, right? So in the past, the CI schema was actually hosted by Schema Store and not GitLab, and they already had existing tests. So when we started hosting this CI schema in GitLab, the maintainers actually told us, okay, hey, we have all these tests already, why don't you take them as well? So that was part 1 of the spike that I did for these tests, which is how do I import the existing Schema Stores tests and get them working in GitLab. So let me show you how it works right now. This is I'm actually running the test over here. So this is the CI schema spec. We have positive tests and negative tests. So why are they categorized in this way? The Schema Stores tests were actually written in JSON. So here's an example, a retry when unknown JSON. The whole idea for testing the CI schema is that we provide the data that we provide correct and incorrect data, and then validate them against the CI schema. And then we just check that, okay, is this correct data being validated correctly, and is this incorrect data being invalidated, if that makes sense. So basically, we're just giving different kinds of input to check how we are to check that we are defining our keywords in the schema correctly. So for example, here in the retry unknown when, it's a negative test because this when keyword is not actually valid. We have specific values that we are expecting, like maybe always or never, but it's not gonna recognize GitLab CI retry object unknown when as a valid when object. Unlike here in the positive test, for example, these are the valid keywords for a when keyword. So I hope that kind of illustrates the difference between those two tests. So how it looks like in the actual like script that runs them, we basically import all of them, all of these JSON tests, and then we use the AJV package, which is basically like a data validation package specifically for JSON schemas. And there's basically just like these two tests, right? The positive test and the negative test for each JSON test that we have here. We try to validate them against the schema using this to validate JSON schema. Now this to validate JSON schema is like a custom matcher that we created specifically just for testing JSON schemas. I think over here, it looks like this. The validator is something that, oh, sorry, I should have shown that earlier. So in AJV, using AJV, we create a validator function by providing the schema that we are going to use to validate the data against. And we pass that here. So when validating a JSON schema, we pass the input data and the schema validator function. So here in the custom matcher, we're just basically, if you just use those two inputs, AJV will do its job of validating the data against the schema and let's say, oh, is it valid or not? And then that's what we pass here back to Jest. And then we also check if AJV gives us any error messages, and we show that as well. So for example, if we, let's find an example here. Let's go back to retry. This is a positive test. So let's say we change this one into an empty array. I think, oh, I guess that's valid. Let's try a null value. Okay, so it's gonna, oh, okay, wait, hold on. This isn't. Expect token in JSON. Okay, this is not a valid JSON. Okay, here we go. So because we changed the test here, this is supposed to be a valid test, but here it's not working. And this is the error messages that AJV provides for us. So that's basically what how the tests work in action. So let's put this back and make it work again. Yeah, so it's working now. So that's fine. Basically, we've already imported the existing tests from Schema Store, and that covers like maybe 95% of the CI schema, and we could stop there. But while I was doing the spike, I wanted to also check if we could maybe write the tests in YAML. And the reason why is because if we go back here in the pipeline editor, we are writing our CI config in YAML. And this is like the format that the user is writing in. So it would be great if we could test the CI schema in the same format. And it also helps our developers, right? Because otherwise, the developers will be writing the tests in JSON. Well, since we will be writing our CI config in YAML, and then we will have to reformat it to JSON in order to test it back, test it with the JSON schema, right? So if we could automate that extra step of converting the YAML input into JSON just to run the tests, it would save us a lot of time, and it would be easier to parse the code as well. So in the time that we were hosting the CI schema, but we didn't have tests yet, we already actually added new keywords into it. So I used this opportunity to like create the tests for them and see if we could work with them in YAML. So these are the sample tests. And as you can see, it basically looks like a CI config. Like you could just copy paste this and put it back here in the pipeline editor, and it's oh, it's not going to work now because is this an invalid test? Oh yeah, because it's a negative test. So if we copy paste like a positive test back here in the pipeline editor, it's going to work as it is. So the idea is like you can just write your own CI config and use it as a test. You can even use the snippets of code in the documentation, like the YAML sample code there, and use them as a test. So it's easier for like contributors to be able to contribute to the CI schema as well. So okay, we have like these sample positive and negative tests in YAML, but the issue is how are we going to make it work with our existing script? It's the main issue here is that we do not. How do we automate that step where we convert the YAML into JSON, right? So I think what we did here was, yeah, we created our own JS transformation. So every time we import a YAML file, this package that we already have existing, it's already in package JSON. So we use JS YAML to basically every time we import a YAML file, we convert it back to JSON so that it can be reused here in the script that we just did. So now it's every time we want to update the CI schema, and want to add tests to it, it's just as easy as like creating your own sample CI config here that like that has the keywords that we want to test, and then we just create like a negative sample test where it's supposed to be invalid, and a positive sample test where it's supposed to be valid, and then just import them. And we can actually just like import those files and add them here in these very long list of object entries, and run the script and see like if it works or not, or if it breaks any other tests. But yeah, basically that's how we are adding tests to the JSON schema now. And I did it this way as well, so that like with the custom matchers and everything, because I think besides the CI schema, there are also other JSON schemas that are being used in GitLab. So if there are other teams that need to add their own tests to it, they can easily just use this custom matchers and like use this MR as a guide on how to be able to do that. So I try to like make sure it's written, the MR is written in such a way that it's kind of hopefully easy to understand. But yeah, I guess that's pretty much it. If anyone has questions.
Yeah, it looks great. Thank you for walking through this. I have a few questions, but I think the first one is this one. This change went out, I think it looks like about 2 weeks ago then, as part of just a .com release for 14.10. Yeah, that's great. As you were going through a lot of the testing with doing the schema testing, I think you noted a lot of these things already that you uncovered, but were there other challenges that maybe you just didn't anticipate that came up, and how did you, I guess, work around those? Yeah,
the main problem for me was that I don't really work with so this is the kind of issue where I had to work with chest transformation, right? And the like figuring out what's the best way to add those YAML tests was probably one of the things that tripped me up at first, because it's basically going through the testing internals of GitLab, which isn't something that I work on every day. So it was pretty neat going through, okay, how everything works in the code base. And at first I was thinking of maybe like adding new packages and stuff like that, but it's just complicates things further. So I already had before I created this MR, we did have a spike issue where I just like created a POC of this, and then I had someone else review it, Paul Slaughter, and he basically helped me like get to know how to test this better, like, and how to integrate it with our own testing tools and not like add all these unnecessary packages and whatnot. So yeah, just reaching out to our experts and seeing, getting all that guidance was really helpful.
That's great. It's kind of a follow-up, I guess, as you look at this initial iteration that's now out on GitLab. Are there things that you're considering, I guess, for the future for this code, or things that maybe just were outside of the, I guess, the spike or the initial iteration that you're, I guess, thinking about?
I think Fred and I were discussed this in the issue as well. So the JSON tests, there were a lot of JSON tests, but going forward, we wanted to write all of our tests in YAML because that is the format that we are using for the CI config. So it would actually be great if, I'm basically treating the JSON tests as like legacy tests right now, right? And just making sure that they're there. And if something breaks, that's a signal that something went wrong. But eventually, like maybe it would be great if we could convert all of them into YAML. And so like we don't have to worry about maintaining these two kinds of tests. Yeah, I think it'll also depend in the future because we haven't actually had to update the CI schema since we added these tests. So seeing how contributors and other developers update the schema, sorry about that, update the schema, and if they find any problems along the way, then we'll get to them.
That's great. Yeah, great work. I mean, it's great that it's available, and it's and hopefully with some of that feedback, it'll help us with formulating our next steps, and as it kind of dovetails with some of the things that you're already thinking about. Jaime, did you have any questions? I don't want to, I put all my questions ahead of time, but certainly if there's anything that you had.
No, sorry, I was late. It was it's a bit earlier for me with the time changes and stuff. So yeah. I didn't catch all of it. So I was trying to read the MR and see what's happening.
Yeah, as I told Maria too, just to get this back going again for APAC, I was trying to find out a suitable time. But now that we're through all time zone changes and changing hours and everything else, I'll probably be nudging this back by about probably 2 or 3 hours going forward, because then that'll align with certainly both of your time zones really well. And even if it's a few hours later for me, that's it's no big deal too. But yeah, so if you get a chance to check out the early part of the showcase demo that Maria did, I'll have it up on our Unfiltered channel probably within the next half hour or so.
Awesome.
Yeah, and if you have questions like even after this, just feel free to reach out on Slack or yeah. Yeah,
that sounds great. As I also mentioned to Maria and everyone who's viewing this, we do have upcoming showcases in the next couple of months from the incubation team as well as the newly formed observability team. And so those are things that we can expect to be starting to pop up in both weeks for showcases. So keep an eye out for that, as well as any things that all of you are working on too. This is just one great example, but if there's other things that you feel like are suitable, even if they're work in progress, I think it's exciting just because then others can watch this video and certainly get to know all the things that are great things that are being worked on by all of you. Okay, well, if there's nothing else, thank you and have a great start to your days. Thank you for everyone for watching, and I look forward to chatting with both of you and all of you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.